All right. Looks like I've gotten through all that stuff. Dr. Lott is here. Let's go over and we will test out everything here and get him ready to go this morning and see what we can see. Good morning, Dr. Lott. How are you this morning?
Doing well. How about yourself?
No complaints. No complaints. It's a beautiful day in paradise. It's sunny and, well, it's dark right now, but it'll be sunny and about 20 degrees. So we're into the middle of getting ready for winter to go.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm in Montana, so it's probably not quite as dark, but we're getting ready for winter too. We're supposed to get snow next week.
Yeah, I've been watching you. Now, did you recently move to Montana? Because I've been seeing a lot of pictures on your Facebook of the different areas and views from your porch and everything else. Is that something recent within the last couple of years?
Yeah, about 4 years ago.
Nice. Yeah, it's something about being out in kind of that freedom country is definitely a good thing. Well, I'm excited.
After I worked in Washington, D.C., I basically wanted to get about as far away from D.C. as I could. So.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
I was going to try Alaska, but the plane flights to give talks would have been a little bit too long there.
That's true. Yeah, we are. I mean, although unless you were talking in Europe all the time, we are kind of the center point for flights to Europe. But yeah, in the U.S., it definitely would have added a lot of time to what you didn't need. So that's for sure. Well, we're glad to have you, and we're happy to talk about this stuff. And I'm excited to hear some of the things that you have to say. Some of
the things? You're just excited about some of the things I have to say?
All right. Well, I have to admit, all of the things you're going to have to say. That's it, John. That's it.
Okay. You really know how to hurt a guy's feelings.
Yeah. So. Well, I got to tell you, I love every time you write something, I'm always trying to track it down. And I actually created a Google, what do they call that? Google News alert. On my Google thing, so that anytime you post something, I'm trying to make sure it doesn't always catch everything, but and then you were kind enough to always send me a text if there's something really hot that you wrote. So I appreciate that. But yeah, we're ready to go here and get things out. So we are just about a minute out, John. Hold the line. I'll be right back to you. I'm going to put you on mute for a second here and get things ready. Breaking news, no snow till the second week of November, said Rick. Well, I mean, fingers crossed we can hope for that. That would be unusual, but I would not say no to that at this point. When I hit that snow yesterday driving up from down south to Fairbanks, it wasn't a rude awakening, but it was definitely an unwelcome awakening when I hit that snow coming north from Fairbanks, because I left my house with sunshine and green grass, and all that snow up here is definitely depressive. All right, 30 seconds out. Ready to rejoin the Michael Duke Show, Common Sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Please like and share this. Please share. If you want more folks to hear about what Dr. Lott has to say, you got to share it. And it doesn't matter where you are, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, wherever you're watching this, you can share it out, and we'll be and everybody will be happier because they got the good information. So let's continue on here. 5 seconds now. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. All right, welcome back to the program. Thanks for coming in and joining us. Firearms Friday continues right now. On the program with us this morning is Dr. John Lott. He is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of a whole slew of books, More Guns, Less Crime, War on Guns. There's so many different ones. But he's also a very prolific author when it comes to opinion pieces and news articles. His most recent one was published in the Washington Times, and it talks about the importance of the Second Amendment and really kind of paints a picture in relation to what's happening in Israel. And, of course, the idea that a good guy with a gun makes all the difference. So we welcome Dr. John Lott to the program this morning and say, good morning, doctor. Thanks for coming on board.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So this article is a great piece, and I appreciate all your hard work on it. Let's get started with this, talking about, of course, this points out, and this being the attack of this brutal and evil attack by Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October. This points out in graphic detail why the idea of a good guy with a gun makes a difference. I mean, we talk about where there were kibbutzes or different areas. Some homes had firearms, and they in turn were able to prevent some of the things that were going on and hold out against terrorists, etc. And this actually shows us there's lessons to be learned here, I guess, in light of this evil act. We as Americans can learn some of these lessons. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, Israel's had huge changes in their gun control laws over time. Israel obviously has faced terrorist attacks from even before they became a country. If you look at the attacks, though, there was a big change in the attacks and how they occurred in 1972, and there's a simple reason for that. Prior to 1972, the way that they dealt with terrorist attacks was to go and put more military, more police on the streets. But what they discovered, civilians weren't allowed to carry. And what they discovered was that no matter how much money they spent, no matter how many officers they put on the street, they simply couldn't cover all the possible targets, and that these terrorists had real tactical advantages. So, for example, if you have a police officer on a bus and you have a terrorist there, the terrorist can either wait until after the officer leaves before they attack, or they can go and move on to another target themselves, or they can try to kill the officer first and then know that they'll have free reign to go after everybody else that's on the bus because they won't be armed. In 1972, what Israel did was it began to allow civilians to carry concealed handguns for protection. Afterwards, you had as high as maybe 14% of the adult population with permits. And what you found was that radically changed the tactical advantages that the terrorists had. A terrorist, in Alaska, you may have, 10% or so of the adult population carry. You go to a movie theater or a mall or a restaurant or a grocery store, it's very likely that somebody nearby is carrying, but you would never know whether or not a person's carrying or not. And the same thing's true with the terrorist. You may have 30 people behind him on the bus. And if he's trying to decide whether to go after the police officer there, he reveals his position, and he has to worry that while he's trying to take out the police officer, there may be one or two of those 30 people behind him who will be able to go and stop him. Right. And what you saw is that prior to 72, almost all the terrorist attacks in Israel involved machine guns. After 1972, virtually all of them involved bombs. But the thing is, just as we've had a debate here in the United States over gun control, unfortunately, Israel has had the same type of debate. In September, before the religious holidays, the National Police went out and advised anybody who was able to legally carry to be able to go and do so because of possible terrorist attacks that can occur during the holidays. The thing is, the politicians on the left went out and started talking about how dangerous it was for civilians to be able to go and carry. And people have to know, up until recently, they've only had now about 3% of the adult Jewish population being allowed to go and carry. So there weren't that many people who were able to carry even when the police were calling for them to do so. I mean, you can imagine how the attack at the music festival might have turned out differently if you had some people there carrying guns. It would have at least slowed down the attackers and given other people a chance to go and escape. But they weren't able to do that. And, a couple kibbutzes where they were able to go into the arms locker and pass out weapons to the civilians that were there, they had very different outcome there in terms of being able to protect people. I mean, anybody who watches the videos about how Israelis were huddled up in bomb shelters and just had to wait for the terrorists to come in and go and kill them. How that could have been very different. But on Sunday, after the terrorist attack, on Saturday, the Israeli Minister of Security issued a rule that dramatically changed the issuing of permits. So you could basically, if you didn't have a criminal record, you could call in and they would automatically grant you the ability to go and carry. It's too bad that that didn't happen a week earlier or a month earlier. A lot of the carnage that happened with, I guess, about 1,400 people right now that they believe were murdered could have been very different.
Yeah. Well, and it really, some of the other restrictions that you saw, because we used to think of Israel as not necessarily the Wild West, but much freer in their laws in many ways than many places in America. And that may have been true back in 1972. But as of by now, you've seen that. Again, you've seen a reduction. You quote that in the beginning of your article, talking about how today it's just 3% of the population. 20 years ago, it was 10% of the population. And they have some really wild restrictions, including a 50-round limit per year in ammunition purchases. And even the emergency orders only allowed for a doubling of that, 100 rounds, which there was a story of a mom and a dad protecting their family. They had guns, and they both were able to protect their children who survived, but they were both killed. Between the two of them, they only had 100 rounds of ammunition facing off however many terrorists there were. And so what if they had had 200 or 300 rounds of ammunition? Would they have been able to survive? I mean, there's some stories here that definitely raise this to the, raise the idea of this. We need to remember that we do have some freedoms, and it's one of the reasons why we need to protect it, because as you point out, the tactical advantage, a terrorist can choose the time and the place. They can do anything they want. And you quote in here, one of the biggest quotes in here, an incredible 94% of mass shootings in the United States occur in places where civilians are banned from having guns at all. And that just points out some of the problems that we're having around the country today with places like New York and California picking all these safe spaces and everything else.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the ironies is you have Biden, after the mass public shootings earlier this year in California, Biden goes to California and basically says that the rest of the United States ought to adopt the types of gun control laws that they have in California. The problem with that is that California actually has a very high rate of mass public shootings. Whether you look at the years from 2000 on, or 2010 on, or 2020 on, California's rate is much higher than the average for the rest of the states. And in many years, twice as high as a state like Texas. I mean, one of the ironies is last year, you had these billboards springing up in Los Angeles and San Francisco warning Californians not to move to Texas because of the supposedly high rate of mass public shootings that are occurring in Texas. But, the media didn't kind of fact check to see whether or not that was true or not. There's a simple thing that goes on. You look at much of California already was a gun-free zone. In Los Angeles County, where we had two mass public shootings, big ones earlier this year, there was only about one concealed carry permit holder for every 5,600 adults in the county. In Northern California, San Mateo, where they had another big mass public shooting, there was only one permit holder for every 24,000 adults. So, somebody who compared to the rest of the country outside of California and New York, you have about 10.4% of adults are legally having a permit to carry. And that doesn't even account for the fact that in 27 states, including Alaska, you're constitutional carry. So it's not even necessary to have a permit. So, one can only guess how many more people than that may actually be carrying. So anyway, it provides some real insights into why, a mass murderer in California doesn't have very much to worry about in terms of somebody being there to possibly stop them. And the thing is, I wish the media would cover the whole manifestos, or at least the part of the manifestos from these mass murderers or their diaries about why they pick the targets that they do. I mean, take something like the Covenant school shooter in Nashville, Tennessee earlier this year. The Biden administration still has not released the diary that the killer had, but the Nashville police chief had gotten to a look at it before it was turned over to the Biden administration. And he had a press conference where he said that mass murderer had actually planned on attacking another place, another target, a mall, but had decided not to go after that because of armed security that was there. People were also allowed to carry concealed handguns there. And so a murderer there went after the school because they knew it was a place that wouldn't have protection. Just one other point about the laws that create these gun-free zones in Tennessee. Violating the school gun-free zone is punishable by up to 6 years in prison. For you and I, 6 years in prison, that's a major penalty. Our lives would be completely changed as a result of going to jail for 6 years. But take something like this mass murderer. Let's assume that the mass murderer had lived. They killed 6 people. They're already going to be facing 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties. Well, somebody who faces 6 life sentences say, I can live with 6 life sentences, but you add another 6 years onto it, and that's just too much. That will stop me from being able to go and commit this atrocity there.
Right.
And so the problem that you have is that these laws, the only thing that they do is assure the murderer that the murderer doesn't have to worry about some good person there being able to go and stop them.
It's the criminalization of law-abiding citizens who are, by their very definition, law-abiding. They can carry and live within the norms of society and be able to protect themselves. But instead, they want to penalize everyone for the actions of a very few, specifically those criminals who, again, by definition, are criminals, are going to break the law. It's a shocking thing. But the biggest thing, of course, is that many of the people who are pushing back against this are basically all politicals, all politicians. You quote in this article from several organizations that are law enforcement organizations, not agencies, not led by some political appointee or a police chief, but the rank and file members. Police believe that that is the best way for society and citizens to be protected, is to have armed citizens. Let's talk about that for a second.
Right. Well, I mean, look, police obviously have to deal with this. They run into bad guys all the time. They know the benefit to themselves of being able to go and have guns. Anybody who's read my academic research knows that I think police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But one thing the police know themselves that you can see from surveys is that the police realize that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crime's committed. That doesn't take anything away from their ability to go and deter criminals or arrest criminals that are there, but it raises the question about what people should do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves. And simply telling people to behave passively isn't a very good option. In fact, it's the most dangerous option often for people to take when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves. It'd be great if the police were there all the time, but they're not. And It turns out that having a gun is by far the safest course of action for people to take.
Dr. John Lott is our guest, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can find him at crimeresearch.org if you want to see a lot of his writings and everything else. We're going to continue our discussions with him in just a moment. We'll talk a little bit. I want to talk to him a little bit about the Brune decision and some of the effects there, what he's seeing across the states, and whatever else Dr. Lott has got under his hat for today. We'll be discussing in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll return with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
All right, Dr. Lott is our guest. We're continuing right now, getting ready to jump into this. I'm broadcasting remotely today, so a lot more buttons and bells and knobs to make everything work today. Dr. Lott, I do want to talk with you if you have some time here to talk a little bit about the effects of the Bruen decision and what it means. I'm assuming that you've seen what's happened in California over the last couple days and some of the decisions that have come out of there. And I kind of want your take on that. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about all these blue and liberal states after Bruen. They were forced by the courts to change their concealed carry permit schemes. But at the same time, they continue to throw roadblocks up for citizens and basically make people more unsafe. And so I'd love to talk about that. What else are you working on these days, Doctor? What other stories could people be looking forward to seeing from you here in the next week or two?
Well, I mean, we just put out an amicus brief on a case that the Supreme Court's going to be hearing on November 7th. There's a case called Rahimi, where an individual with basically a civil decision without even a hearing had his guns taken away. The problem is that this is a pretty bad guy. He had lots of violent crimes that were there.
Right.
You kind of worry that bad cases make bad law, so to speak. And given how John Roberts is kind of very political on these things, you kind of worry that he might vote the wrong way on this type of thing, because it would have a really major decision. And the reason is, I mean, you mentioned Bruen. In Bruen, Clarence Thomas gave a clear rule on what courts are supposed to follow. And that is, you go and look at the text of the Second Amendment. If that's not clear, you go and look at the legislative debate. If that's not clear, then what you do is you go and see what laws were in effect in either 1791 when the Second Amendment was ratified, or in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was ratified and applied the Bill of Rights to the states. Well, the type of law that's relevant in Rahimi wasn't enacted federally until 1994, long after those rules were in effect. And so it's clear that it wouldn't have met Clarence Thomas's test that was there. The problem that you have with Bruen is, while there are 4 justices, including Thomas, which agreed with his decision in full, you have Kavanaugh wrote concurrence, and Roberts joined that, which said they thought that Thomas was right in terms of the logic on how to evaluate these laws, but at the same time listed a whole bunch of laws that they thought were constitutional that didn't meet that standard. And so the problem with Rahimi is if the court, if you have Kavanaugh and Roberts kind of go with the 3 liberals on the court, you'll end up with a situation where a lot of Bruen will be overturned.
Right.
Then, see, here's the problem with judges. Judges like power. They don't like bright line rules. So you look at something like the First Amendment, and the First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law with regard to freedom of the press or religion or assembly or other things that are there. And but the way the courts interpreted it is Congress shall pass no law unless Congress has a good reason, and we, the judges, get to determine whether or not we think Congress has a good reason or not. And so they developed all these so-called balancing tests and what have you. When I was teaching in law schools, I would kind of make the joke, what would they have had to write if they really meant Congress shall pass no law. Would they have to write Congress will never, ever, 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 ever pass such a law? And they say, okay, now they mean it. It seems pretty clear. I mean, anybody who can read normal English would say Congress shall pass no law. I mean, how much clearer could they be on that? But judges don't like that, because if they kind of muddy things up there and get rid of the bright lines, then they are the ones who ultimately get to make these policy decisions. And the same thing is true with the Second Amendment. Shall not infringe. You would think for people that could normally read English, that would be pretty clear. But my guess is Roberts and possibly Kavanaugh, though I hope not, are going to think that they should judge on a law by law basis whether or not they think that it should be constitutional or not. And if that's the case, then a lot of the cases that you're referring to in California and what have you are going to be kind of thrown into limbo where
I'm sorry, we got to jump back in here. The Michael Dukes Show, Common Sense Radio. Dr. John Lott is our guest. Here we go. Let's do it. All right, Dr. John Lott is our guest. We're continuing here on this Firearms Friday. Dr. Lott was just talking about the Supreme Court case decision on Bruen, and we see it as, me in the show, and I think most of you see it as one of the best decisions that has come out of the Supreme Court in regards to gun rules. I think it continues to lay the foundation on top of Miller and Heller and all the other laws that have been put out there. But Dr. Lott just pointed out to one flaw in this, and that is the kind of, it wasn't a split decision, but the four judges were all unanimously decided that it was good, but Kavanaugh and Roberts concurred, but with some caveats. And I think this is the first time I've really heard some of the differentiations in there. And so Dr. Lott, if you could reiterate again some of the dangers that comes out of this kind of split in Bruen, although they all voted for it, the concurrence at the end was kind of a split concurrence. So if you could lay that back out again for folks on the radio, I'd appreciate it. Sure.
Well, Clarence Thomas's decision in Bruen was pretty straightforward. He was saying that, look, in order to go and judge whether a law is constitutional or not, you go and you read what the Second Amendment says. If it's not clear from that, you go and look at the legislative debate that was held at the time. And if that's not clear, you go and look to see what laws were in effect in either 1791 when the Second Amendment was ratified, or in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was ratified and applied the Bill of Rights to the state. And but you had four justices, including Thomas, who signed on with that. You had a concurring opinion that was authored by Justice Kavanaugh and signed on by Roberts, who said that they agreed with the logic that Thomas put forward on how to evaluate the law. But the problem is, then they went and listed out a whole bunch of laws that clearly wouldn't have met that test. And the concern is that you have judges and justices who don't like bright lines, who like to be able to go and decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not they think a law is constitutional or not, rather than having the types of bright rules that Justice Thomas put forward. And so the example I gave you during the break was, you look at something like the First Amendment, where it says Congress shall pass no law. I don't know what more they could have written in order to make that clear, if that's what they meant. Would they have to write Congress will never, ever, 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 ever pass a law. And they say, okay, they meant it. Because the way the Supreme Court has interpreted over time is that Congress shall pass no law unless they have a good reason. And we, the justices and judges, get to be the ones who determine whether or not we think it's a good reason or not.
Right.
And it's judges like to be the final arbiters. They like to muddy things up. They don't like bright lines because it restricts their power. And unfortunately, the implication is that on November 7th for oral arguments called Rahimi, which may muddy this up a lot because you have a really bad guy there. The guy had a long, violent criminal arrest record. Unfortunately, he wasn't really prosecuted for those cases, all the violent crimes. He was a drug dealer and stuff. But there was a civil case which took away his guns. And but the difference between a criminal case and a civil case is that in a criminal case, you have to have beyond a reasonable doubt for taking away somebody's guns. So it's like 98% sure that the person actually did it. In a civil case, it's just what they call the preponderance of the evidence. Is it like 50.1% versus 49.9% sure that the person did the act? And in fact, there wasn't even a hearing, and the person didn't even have a lawyer during the process here. At least in criminal cases, you have a lawyer to represent you if you're going to face losing certain rights. And so the problem is that the type of law which took away Rahimi's guns wasn't adopted until 1994. That's so long after either 1791 or 1868. And but since this guy's a bad guy there, the pressure will be on Kavanaugh and Roberts, particularly Roberts will be likely to fold, who will look at the politics of this, saying, well, it's a bad guy, we don't want him to have a gun. You or I might think, well, maybe you should have prosecuted him for some of these violent felonies that he'd already committed, maybe, or, had bail that kept him in jail. Rather than have to go and rely on some backup there.
Well, it reminds me of the old Benjamin Franklin quote, or maybe one that's attributed to Franklin, that said, better 100 bad men go free than one good man be, imprisoned, kind of thing. They should have been, focusing on the laws that were on the books and prosecuting him for that instead of utilizing this constitutionally questionable law in the end to make it stick. So it's definitely frustrating. And like you said, they want that wiggle room. They want that discretionary power, judges and justices across the country, to be able to interpret the laws as they see fit. And Bruin has gone a long way to stopping some of these lesser judges in doing that. But it is even
then, it's largely whether the judges are Democrats or Republicans that are determining what they're doing on this. So you look at the Ninth Circuit. Even if you have Benitez in San Diego as a federal judge striking down some of these laws as unconstitutional, the overall circuit is controlled by Democrats, and they're doing whatever they can to slow walk these cases and prevent them from getting to the Supreme Court for any type of decision. What's happening is that at the end of the next administration, Clarence Thomas will be 80, Sam Alito will be 78. You lose one or both of those individuals, you'll have a very different Supreme Court. And at the end of next year, Democrats will control 67% of the circuit and district court judges in the country. And at the end of the next administration, they may control something near 80% of them. And if you look at these decisions, about 98% of the time, if you know the judge's political affiliation, you know how they're going to rule on these cases.
We're down to the last couple minutes here, Dr. Lott. So I just want to finish up and talk about anything else that you are working on for folks out there who are listening on the radio or on the internet. Some of the things they should be looking out for from CPRC or from yourself, some of your opinion pieces. Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, give you the floor here.
Sure, well, that's nice of you. Well, we actually had an empirical study that was relevant for the Rahimi case, where we looked at what impact these types of restraining orders, these civil restraining orders had on things like domestic violence. And while maybe preventing a felon could go from having guns can be useful for that, we couldn't find any evidence that there was a beneficial effect in terms of these civil type actions, which have a much lower standard of proof that's necessary to go and take away somebody's guns. A lot of people aren't even represented by lawyers when they go into these types of cases, because it may cost you $10,000 or more to have a lawyer. And if the bad thing's going to happen is you're going to lose your guns, a lot of people will say, I want to have a gun, but is it really worth $10,000 to me to go and put on the proper defense that is there? And so,
Dr. John Lott, our guest for today. Doctor, thank you so much. Hold the line for just a second. Folks, we're out of time. Hour 2 is dead ahead. The Michael Dukes Show, Common Sense Radio. Dr. Lott, I think that's the scary part, is how many, and this is the continuing push that we see, is because of the bad actions of a few. And Benitez and his decision, which we're going to talk about here in the next hour on the assault weapons ban in California, really goes into detail about this. It talks about the actual percentages. And I mean, it's like 0.4 or 5 zeros deep on the percentages of bad, people who are doing bad things. And you want to punish the 99.9999% of people who are lawful, legal gun owners. It makes absolutely no sense.
Right. I mean, you're talking about, according to the National Crime Victimization Survey, maybe 240,000, 300,000 gun crimes that are committed each year in the United States. If each crime gun is used on average twice, which is probably an underestimate, you compare that to, maybe 400 million guns owned in the United States. You can see what tiny fraction of percent of legally owned guns are used there. But the main thing to me is just looking at the ratio between crimes committed with guns versus defensive gun uses. The best estimates that we have indicate that, at least 1.6 million, maybe 2 million times a year, people are using guns defensively. And, that's like 5 times more frequently that people use guns to stop crime than they use them to commit crime.
Right.
And the problem that you have, and people need to understand this, is that when you pass these laws, as you said earlier in the discussion, it's basically the most law-abiding citizens who obey these rules. And so if you pass, let's just take something simple like a gun ban. If you ban guns and you're virtually always just taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, you may take a few guns away from the criminals, but if you're primarily taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, you're making it easier for criminals to go and commit crime. And there's a reason why every place in the world, not just Chicago and Washington, D.C., where all handguns or all guns are banned, you see increases in murder rates and homicide rates after the ban, because the law-abiding citizens are having their guns taken away, and it's making it easier for criminals to commit crimes. And the point is, a ban is a simple example, but that basic point about who you're disarming applies to gun control laws generally.
Right. Well, and again, as we say on this program many times, criminals, by the very definition of their name and who they are, will break the law. They don't care. They're ambivalent to your laws, and it doesn't matter if there's a sign on the door of the mall that says no guns allowed here. If they've decided to go in and shoot up the mall, that sign is not going to stop them, because they've already decided that they're not going to be part of societal norms in that regard.
Well, let me give you a simple example if I have a minute. And that is, you look at the Nashville Covenant school shooter from earlier this year. That person in Tennessee, it's a 6-year penalty for violating a gun-free zone. For you or I, that would be a major life-changing penalty. But for this murderer who killed 6 people, let's say they had lived, they died at the scene, but let's say they had lived and they were facing 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties. Do you think they'll say to themselves, I can live with 6 life sentences, but you add another 6 years on that,
Right.
and that's just too much. I won't commit the crime.
Yeah.
So the law, the only thing that the law does, penalties matter to these people, but the only thing that penalty does is to make it so that the most law-abiding citizens are not going to be there to protect themselves, and that it makes it that the criminals don't have to worry about somebody being able to protect themselves.
Reminds me of that old saying, when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Unfortunately, it's kind of a truthism. Either real criminals or even law-abiding citizens who decide to ignore the law, everybody becomes an outlaw at that point. All right. Well, Dr. John Lott, thank you so much for coming on board. As always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. I look forward to your next piece, and I appreciate you coming on board this morning.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on board. Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. I'm going to post a link up to his piece that we just talked about this morning in the Washington Times, and you can find it online, posting it up right now in the chat room for you to review. Good stuff from Dr. John Lott.